You ready, Ellen?
Yes, go.
Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to the PMI Victorian History Library. My name is Lauren, and I'm the Chief Librarian. Our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. A brief overview of our facilities. The bathroom is through those doors to the right and the first door to the left. Emergency exits, there's one through this door, down the corridor, and at the end, or through the main doors, and the staff will show you where to go. This year, we celebrate a momentous occasion, as it marks our library's 170th anniversary. Established in 1854, we are the second oldest library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 40,000 items, and we take pride in being the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection available for loan. Our focus remains rooted in local history, housing a wealth of information encompassing most towns in Victoria. We will be taking photographs and videos during the event, so if you don't want to be filmed or photographed, just let us know. I'd like to welcome Tom Clark, author of Should Have Been Higher, a celebration of 30 years of Triple J's Hottest 100. This is a book about a music countdown that has become an Australian cultural institution and a space where young Aussies steer the conversation. Tom, over to you.
Thank you so much. There we go. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much for coming. It's so exciting to be here at the PMI History Library, talking to you guys about my favourite topic in the entire world. A topic that I can and will stand up here and talk about for as long as I'm allowed to, but this is not just a lecture. If you have questions on the way through or comments or stories that you want to contribute, let me know, because that's what I'm here to talk about, the Hottest 100 and what it means and why it matters. Because it is one of my favourite things in the world, and it's one of my favourite topics to talk about, and so I'm glad that I get to chat with all of you about it today. So I want to start off with a question that no doubt has been on a lot of your minds. I'm sure it's been weighing you down. It's probably why you've come to this talk on this auspicious occasion to find out the answer to the question, why did Nickelback never make the Hottest 100? And look, it's a great question, and that's what we're going to spend the next 40 minutes talking about, team. Let's really dive in. I start off with that question for a couple of reasons. One, it's funny and it makes me laugh. And two, it is because I get a version of that kind of question everywhere that I go to talk about this book and to talk about the Hottest 100. Why did jazz music never make the Hottest 100? Why does country music never make the Hottest 100? One big fella, I was selling books in Ballarat, and a big fella burled up to me at my stall and he said, "Hey, I don't listen to any of that crap. Why don't you come and talk to me when AC/DC makes the Hottest 100? Yeah, two things for you, sir. One, they did. They made it in 1996. They snuck in 96 with a song that no one will remember because no one remembers any AC/DC song that came after Thunderstruck. And two, chill out, man. It's just a book. But he was very intense. And people do. They get really intense, right? They get really passionate and intense about the music that they love. And they get even more intense about something that seeks to put all of that stuff that we care about and love so much into a list, into an order that we might not agree with, but that we very much are a part of. And so I've spent a lot of time in my life, and particularly in eventually what has become this book, looking at the Hottest 100 from every different angle and trying to work out effectively, why do we care about it so much? Because it shouldn't matter the way that it does. You know, it inspires such intense passion in people, and it has survived for such a long period of time and through so much change that it is really fascinating and fun and interesting to look at it and try to think, what holds it all together? You know, what is it about the Hottest 100 that allows all of us in this room, no matter what level of connection we might have to alternative music and the Hottest 100, to know instantly that my question about Nickelback was a joke? Why do we instinctively know that Nickelback is not a Hottest 100 band? Why do we know instinctively that Nickelback is not cool or fun or the kind of thing that we want to listen to on the fourth Saturday of every January? You know, why do we know that about Nickelback when, to my mind, a song like Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon, which won the Hottest 100 in 2008, sounds an awful lot more like Nickelback than some of the much cooler, much more interesting rock bands that Kings of Leon were so often compared to at the time, bands like the Strokes and the White Stripes and the Killers. Kings of Leon sound a hell of a lot more Nickelbacky to me than any of those other bands, and yet one of them won the Hottest 100, one of them remains pop culture's nastiest joke. And I think it's really interesting to look at the Hottest 100 from that perspective, right? Because the Hottest 100 is, as it has been billed, as it has developed into the world's greatest musical democracy, right? Now, what that means is a couple of things. It means everyone gets a choice. Everyone gets to say whatever they like and vote for whatever they like, as long as it is a song from the year that Hottest 100 is counting down. That's the rules. That's the only rules. And yet, democracy is also a process of coming to a consensus. It's all of us working through our own opinions until we all get to the point of, this is our opinion. This is what we all think. This is what we're all accepting as the final result, right? That's what we're doing in a democracy. And the Hottest 100, I think, really shines a spotlight on why democracy is important and why it's interesting, and why, when the stakes are not who gets to control the nuclear codes, can be really fun instead of, terrifying. So that's what I've been really enjoying looking at is the Hottest 100, how it's changed and how it reflects us, Australia as a culture, because it has become this kind of massive cultural institution. You know, it's become so much more than a list of musicians, a list of songs. That it survived at all is amazing. You know, in the early 90s, when this thing was kicking off, people were, did anyone vote in those early Hottest 100s? So people were writing their votes down on the back of an envelope, posting it into Triple J, and then some poor intern had to count all those votes and put them into some sort of ancient computing system, which I imagine was just them writing it down on a book, and then that was being announced on the radio. And just imagine how much people had to care about it, to go through the effort to keep that going. And it has, and now it's so much easier and it's so much more accessible, and we're seeing the changes that have come as it has become easier and more popular and more accessible. And I'll talk about that kind of change in a bit. So it's interesting to before we go to the kind of bird's eye blue sky view of the countdown and what it means. It's interesting to just think about how people respond to the hottest 100 in general, right? And why those sort of questions that I listed out at the start elicit such a strong response in people who have paid attention to the hottest 100 over time, and who, maybe they've stopped listening to it, or maybe they think, Triple J has changed, and maybe it used to be better when they were younger. When you look at the countdown over time, it's true. It has changed, right? It has changed exactly the way that you think it's changed, right? So the Triple J Hottest 100 of the 90s was exactly as rock heavy as people remember it, right? It was all guitars, it was all drums. It was it was rock music through and through, to the point where between 1993 and 1999, 75% of the songs that made the Hottest 100 were rock songs of some sort, right? Skip ahead to the 2010s, and from 2010 to now, it is more like 20% of songs that make the Hottest 100 are rock songs. There just isn't as much guitar music, drums music happening in the Hottest 100. That increase in dance music and hip hop and pop is real, right? It has happened, and so it sounds different. It does. You're not crazy if you listen to the Hottest 100 now and say, what happened? Because it did. It changed a lot, and it moved a lot. So about 50% of songs in the Hottest 100 now, in any Hottest 100 now, are pop or electronic songs, and then there's like another 25% that are hip hop. That's that's the significance of the change, right? In the 2000s, or in the 90s, sorry, we going through kind of a golden age of underground dance music and hip hop, and barely any of that shows up. We get a little bit of old like we get basically no golden age hip hop in the 90s makes the Hottest 100. There's no Jay-Z, there's no Biggie, there's no Snoop Dogg, there's no Outkast, Dr. Dre and Tupac made it once, and that's kind of it, and the rest of the rap music that made the Hottest 100 in the 90s was weird novelty stoner rap songs about smoking a doobie and then hiding from the police. And there's like 6 different versions of that song that show up in those countdowns. The Hottest 100 today is exceedingly different to that, right? There is a ton of really interesting hip hop. There's a ton of really interesting dance music and electronic music, and there is a version of pop music that is distinctively diverse and represents and reflects so many different types of people that we just didn't have in the 90s. The sort of music, and yet, the longer that you look at the Hottest 100, and the more that you think about it, and the more that you read song after song after song, the more you start to see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay, so if you look hard enough, you will see the patterns. It is all well and good to say, well, the Hottest 100, it's gone to the dogs, it used to be so much better. What have they done? Why are they letting all this stuff in? Literally, my brother, who is in his mid-20s, he called me last year after the Hottest 100, or this year, in January, after the Hottest 100, furious that Doja Cat, an American pop rap artist, had won the Hottest 100. He called me in a flurry, telling me that Americans shouldn't be allowed in the Hottest 100 anymore. It should be only Australian music. Countdown's gone to the... Sorry, that's bad. Countdown's gone to the dogs. And this is someone in their mid-20s. So if you feel like maybe you've aged out of the Hottest 100, it gets you quick. My brother should have a few years left, but it seems like he might be done. So Doja Cat wins the Hottest 100 in 2020, in January 2024. Doja Cat is a black female rapper, musician. She wins with the song Paint the Town Red, right? And it's controversial. It's controversial. It's controversial because she's American. It's controversial because she's a pop star. It's controversial because she is everywhere, right? That song was all over the radio, both mainstream and alternative. It was all over the internet. It was all over TikTok and Instagram and all social media. You could not escape that song as hard as you tried. And so people listen to that and they go, well, that is not what the Hottest 100 is about, right? It's about alternative music. It's about finding the stuff that's different. It's about finding stuff that isn't mainstream, that reflects who we are as the cool, interesting young people of Australia. And yet, in 1995, the winning song of the Hottest 100 was Wonderwall by Oasis. Arguably, the most poppy and popular pop song of the past 40 years, right? A song that is so entrenched in mainstream Western musical culture that there is someone playing it on an acoustic guitar right now within a full block radius of this library, right? And if you listen hard enough, you can probably hear it, because that is how ingrained those opening notes of Wonderwall are in your head, because it is the most played song of the past 40 years, right? And it was in 1995. It was the biggest song in the entire world in 1995, and it sounds so much more like a pop song than Doja Cat does, right? Because the flip side of Oasis being alternative in the 90s is that Doja Cat is, played on mainstream radio, but she is experimental and she is interesting, and her pop music sounds nothing like you expect pop music to sound. This is not Taylor Swift or Rihanna that's won the Hottest 100, right? This is someone who is constantly doing different things with their voice, constantly experimenting with the beats that they're willing to rap over, changing things up with their tempo and their vocal delivery to make a song that sounds nothing like the rest of pop music, and who is literally shaping mainstream radio around her just like constantly evolving presence. That to me is as alternative as it gets, right? And there is no difference between a song like Paint the Town Red winning the Hottest 100 and a song like Wonderwall winning the Hottest 100, except that arguably Wonderwall is more of a pop song than Doja Cat has ever produced. And I say that to point out that, yes, things change. And yes, the Hottest 100 is a reflection of what young people are tuned into at the time, right? But more to the point, it's interesting to watch how the Hottest 100 has both reflected and been molded by what the young people of Australia are invested in at the time, right? So, because alternative music in and of itself is theoretically a form of rebellion, right? Low-key rebellion, obviously. Pretty low consequence rebellion sometimes, but music matters, music is important, and music provides a platform for people who often don't have a platform. And what the Hottest 100 does, which is really interesting, is it gives that platform and that voice to people who can't even make music, right? It allows people to reflect what they care about on a massive platform without having to go out and make something themselves. And that is a really unique thing. That doesn't exist in a lot of places, and arguably anywhere, right? When you start to think about why people are invested in this, it's really interesting to see the way that people have, I guess, expressed their own creativity as part of just something as simple as voting for the Hottest 100. So we have this countdown, this fledgling music countdown on a radio station that's still finding its feet, on a radio station that is, for its time and even today, pretty unique as an offering, right? So Triple J is a nationally syndicated, nationally funded radio station for young people in the early 90s. That is, at the time, fundamentally unique. Now, still pretty unique, right? As far as I can tell, the sort of research that I've been able to do, I think like the UK, like the BBC has a youth radio station, though I don't believe it's anywhere near as popular. But realistically, a country having a nationally funded radio station that purely exists for the young people of this country, that is powered and encouraged by, but also left to its own devices by the government of the country is a really unique prospect. And so Triple J is working out what it's doing, it's finding its feet. They decide to run this countdown. They run it 3 times as an all-time countdown, right? So, greatest songs of all time. Do it. 1989, 1991, 1992. Eventually we get it, they're like, all right, we understand. You guys really like the Smiths and the Cure and Nirvana. It's starting to get maybe a touch repetitive. And so they can feel it slipping away. They take a year off. They come back in 1993 with the annual Hottest 100, right? The first annual Hottest 100. And they're taking a bit of a swing, right? This is a radio station that is just starting. They're still trying to work out why it matters and whether it's going to keep going. And every decision that they make is of consequence. And they pin their hopes to this countdown as an idea, something that young people are going to rally around. And young people do rally around it. And then the first winner of the Hottest 100 of this giant big swing that Triple J took was Asshole by Dennis Leary.
Oh, yeah.
Way to shove it in their face, young Australians of 1993. Asshole by Dennis Leary. Oh my goodness. A novelty song, a mean-spirited, silly, ridiculous novelty song by a famously not very good comedian who's also a terrible musician. His singing voice is so grating, the jokes barely land, and yet this guy swaggering around, talking about pissing on the seat of the toilet just to annoy people, he sweeps through and he wins a countdown. He gets ahead of truly some of the greatest alternative rock songs of all time. You know, it's Creep by Radiohead. It's Killing in the Name of by Rage Against the Machine. It's Cannonball by the Breeders. And all of that is defeated by a novelty song by an American comedian who is just walking around kicking dogs. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when given the power to do something, young people will often pivot, right? It's unexpected, it's surprising, and it's frankly really weird, right? There were so many votes that went to so many songs that you would consider masterpieces of the form and genuinely iconic, rebellious kind of music, right? Radiohead is like, Creep is about a dejected loser walking through his life, trying to work out what it all means and whether he will ever fit in anywhere. Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name of, is a violent, kick down the doors, destruction of capitalism. It is this massive break the windows kind of anthem. You know, Cannonball by the Breeders is just a woman just trying to burst her way through a life of mundanity and oppression, and you can feel that tension in so much of the music, right? It's all there. It's all right there. I need to stand here. Right? That bristling tension, the kind of thing that you would expect from a countdown designed to give young people a say in what matters, is right there. And then on top of it is the most hilarious fuck you in Australian radio history. And that is the recipe. That exact thing there follows through for the rest of the Hottest 100. It's still true today that kind of sense is everywhere. The more you look at the countdown, that when the people who vote in the Hottest 100 get a chance to talk about the music that matters to them, it is so often those two things. It is the kind of feelings that you expect to associate with young people who are working their way through a life that is often difficult, where they are often misunderstood, where they often feel like they don't have a voice. And then that is reflected in sometimes just some real silly stuff. Yeah.
Do you remember in the 60s, of course you might not have been born, you can't really get a grip on, but we had Wild Man Fisher. Frank Zappa discovered this.
Yeah.
Back. Merry-go, merry-go-round, boop, boop, boop. So very, very funny.
Yeah.
And then later on, there was other funny songs that again caught everyone's imagination. Like you say, people like humor.
Yeah.
Or even earlier, it heard the Arab, she could burn and sing.
Yeah. Little Richard, My Ding-a-ling.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's
So sometimes the meaningful ones slide by when the real funny one catches everyone's attention.
yeah, and because sometimes it is more subtle to say F you by making a bit of a joke of everything, right? Rather than kicking down the doors, Rage Against the Machine style. Like, to just be like, yeah, what does anything matter? And how do we strike out against a world that we are still struggling to understand ourselves, right? And I think that gets reflected a lot in music, and it gets reflected a lot specifically in the music that people like and want to champion when they get the chance to vote. Because a song like the songs that these sort of novelty songs, they are not the sort of song that tend to win awards, right? They're not the sort of songs that tend to sell really well, right, on a chart that is controlled by record companies and stuff like that. But they do get reflected up and down the Hottest 100. Anytime that we've had the opportunity to vote a really dumb song into the top 10, they have taken it, right? The Bad Touch by the Bloodhound Gang made the top 10 in 1999. Offspring was littered throughout the top 10s of the 90s. You know, they came third and they came fourth and then they won in 1998. Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
Oh, that was a good one. What about Birdman Kicked My Ass? That one.
Yeah.
Very funny one. That's from the 90s.
Yeah, Scooby Snacks was one of the stoner rap songs that I mentioned before. That I think came 12th one year in the 90s. And these are the sort of things that kind of kept popping up, right? And maybe the most interesting example of that particular phenomenon in the 90s was a song called a song called Backdoor Man by Pauline Pants Down. I don't know if anyone remembers Pauline Pants Down. So Pauline Pants Down was a drag performer living in Sydney in the 90s, and he was a DJ and an electronic artist, and he took clips of interviews that Pauline Hanson had been doing in the 90s, and he stitched them all together and put a beat to it, and had her saying all kinds of wild stuff. Basically, the wild gist is that she was just super into the kind of stuff that George Michael was into in the 90s. And that came fifth in the Hottest 100 in 1995. And it is, to this day, the only song that on Hottest 100 Day, Triple J was not allowed to play because Pauline herself went and got herself an injunction. And as far as I know, Triple J is still not allowed to play that song. I think the injunction remains. So yeah, they got to the number 5 song, and they had to say, it's this, and then move on to the next one. Pauline Hands Down did make it one more time. In 1998, they made it with a song called I Don't Like It. Very similar vibes, but they were allowed to play that one. So, maybe Pauline got bored. Maybe she was busy doing other things. Possibly she was in jail. Possible. At that time, she would have been around that, she might have been in jail at that time. But, Pauline Pants Down is this, I think, kind of hilarious conflation of those two things that I've just been talking about, right? Just the novelty and the silliness combined with, real kind of political anger and just weaponizing humor to take the piss out of someone who is just being publicly awful to so many people who are downtrodden and unable to speak for themselves. So yeah, Pauline Pants Down is a kind of great example of that. And then that combination of silliness and politicization carries through as the countdown continues. And we see it, I think, not always as explicitly, but more and more as the Hottest 100 has become more popular, as it's become more accessible, and then more than that, as music has become more diversified and accessible to people. As we're no longer being fed the music directly from the radio, as people can go and access music in so many different ways on social media, through Spotify, through going and rummaging through an op-shop record collection and finding new stuff that way, however it might be. And then the flip side of that, as musicians have so much more access to put their music into the world by being able to record it in their bedrooms, being able to put it up on YouTube, put it directly to Spotify, not needing record companies and radio stations as much as they used to. Now we're seeing in the Hottest 100, I think, increasingly a direct reflection of what people care about, right? In the 90s and early 2000s, where that music was being fed to them in more direct ways, where the radio was one of the only ways to get that kind of direct access to new music, you can see in those 100 songs that get voted for the ones that matter the most to people, but you don't necessarily get as much of a sense of, I guess, what they would impose themselves, right? They were writing in votes, right? They didn't have to tick the box like you do now. They were writing these in on envelopes, so we can assume that there were a lot of write-in candidates. But to get a consensus, you have to assume there is a bubbling agenda underneath that. Whereas now, where voting is as easy as it is and access to music is so easy, I think we're actually starting to get a bit of a feedback loop insofar as the music that people are voting into the countdown is then ending up on Triple J rather than the other way around. And that's been really interesting to watch, because what we're seeing is a massive explosion of diversity in so many different ways, right? I already talked about how different it's become musically, but demographically it has changed dramatically. And therefore the sound of the Hottest 100 has become so much more interesting and unpredictable. Listening song for song in the Hottest 100 now sounds nothing like it would have when it was Powderfinger and Silverchair and something for Kate that were, getting song after song after song. Now you'll listen to Billie Eilish, followed by Genesis Owusu, followed by Tame Impala, followed by Advanced Joy, and that's so much difference built into that. And so what we've seen is tons more women making it into the Hottest 100, and therefore being represented on festival bills, being represented on the radio, being represented at awards ceremonies. We're seeing a lot more access for and accolades for Indigenous artists in Australia. Triple J has always been, I think, a pretty good supporter of Indigenous artists in this country, but certainly we are now seeing some kind of domination by some people of colour who have found their platform exclusively through Triple J and through the internet that they have then been able to find. After that, Baker Boy and Briggs and AB Original and now even younger artists like Kanamina. And so we're seeing this really fascinating explosion of, well, if we can pick anything we want, it looks so much more different now than it ever has before. And it's really interesting to see what people are reflecting. We've now seen, finally, it took until 2019, but a woman finally won the Hottest 100. Billie Eilish won, Doja Cat won last year. A person of color won, 2017, Kendrick Lamar won the Hottest 100. Just 5 years earlier, the first rapper to ever win the Hottest 100 was Macklemore, a dopey looking white guy rapping about buying stuff from an op shop. Eventually, finally, we get a black artist who is, reflecting a completely different culture. And
did you ever have Grandmaster Flash with "Don't Push Me" because I'm close to?
I mean,
because it seems like that was a big hit all over the world.
Yeah, I know Grandmaster Flash, but I was about 20 years from being born when that song came out.
That's why I thought there might be a problem, because I think that was in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in the 70s.
Late 70s.
Yeah.
Early 80s.
When Grandmaster Flash was coming through.
And Future Shock, all those were the breakdancing songs.
Yeah. And Bambaataa Afrikaans and
Yeah. Afrika Bambaataa.
Yeah. And now those sort of songs and that sort of music, which is now we're seeing almost a really kind of reinterpretation of, so that's really classic hip hop, right? That's coming from the American streets. It's coming from
Life in Manhattan.
Black people who are living a life that is challenging and socially difficult, and they fear for their lives from the police. Still very much a reality for so many people now. But what we're also seeing musically reflected for Australia, which is really interesting to see the Australian kind of melting pot, is that we'll now see it's rap, but it's also influenced by jazz and by traditional African music. And if you listen to Genesis Owusu, or you listen to Sampa the Great or TK Mainzer, you can feel those kind of international, more culturally diverse things coming through that music, and that is now being able to become, mainstream and popular, and that's fascinating and an incredible triumph, I think. And so I guess as a kind of culmination of all these different things that I've talked about, I should probably talk about the what was the culmination of all of those things, which is when the Hottest 100 changed the date and moved from Australia Day, famously Hottest 100 would happen every Australia Day. in 2016, they made the decision to, in 2016, AB Original put out a song called 26 January. It's a protest song. It's quite aggressive. It is a massive stand-up anthem about the way that Indigenous people have been treated in this country and remain and continue to be treated today. It comes 16th in the 2016 Hottest 100, and by 2017, the Hottest 100, they officially changed the date. And it blows up, right? It's a national story. It's talked about in Parliament. The fact that Triple J would make this stand, would make this clear statement against Australia Day in reflection and in solidarity with the Indigenous artists that are that perform on Triple J and are played on Triple J, and in reflection of an ever-growing agitation from the young people who are listening to Triple J and petitioning Triple J, that the date of Australia Day should be changed, and that it is a hard day for Indigenous people and an unacceptable day for Indigenous people, and that celebrating it is a problem that they won't stand for. And so Triple J reflects that. They make a difference. They make a change, and it not only brings that conversation into an even larger national spotlight, it brings that conversation, forces that conversation into a place like Parliament and into all the newspapers, but it also continues to make that conversation an issue every single year, because people continue to talk about it every single year that Australia Day stays on the date. And that is a direct reflection of the power that young people have started to feel as a result of getting a say on what is ultimately just a countdown about music. And I will say, I will finish up on this little anecdote because I love it. I was doing a talk like this at another library a little while ago, and there was an older lady there. She would have been in her 70s, and I was kind of asking people, like, when did you get into the Hottest 100? When did you start listening to it? How, what does it kind of mean to you? And she said that she started listening to the Hottest 100 in 2017 because she'd never listened to Triple J before, never had any interest, saw that they had made this change in the news, and was so moved by it and impressed and proud that they would make this kind of big stand against, in the face of kind of political backlash, that she started listening to the Hottest 100 and discovered all this music that she now really likes. And she listens to the countdown every year and has listened to more music in the last 5 years or 5 or 6 years than she probably listened to for the 30 years before that. I just thought that is so, of all the things I might have predicted that would have come out of writing this book and talking to people about the Hottest 100, a 70-year-old woman having a musical renaissance as a result of the Hottest 100 changing its date was not something that I had on my bingo card, but it was lovely to talk about. That kind of brings me to the end of what I'm here to say, and if you guys have any questions or you've got any memories of the Hottest 100 or stories that you want to bring up, I'm happy to chat and answer questions.
Yeah. With the 100, do people nominate songs and then they select 100 songs, or is it just, could I organise 1,000 people to nominate a song and it all just suddenly appears out of nowhere, or is there some sort of context for how the final 100? Is there a final 100 that's a reflection of a broader number of songs that have been nominated? So when it first started, there was no shortlist. There was just, people just wrote in the 10 songs that they wanted. The way it is now is because it's all online. There are, I think they list, there's a lot, like maybe they list over 1,000 songs that are like already written out that you can just check the boxes of, but you can still do write-in songs. They now have it synced up so that you could just import
straight from Spotify, so you're not going to accidentally spell it wrong or anything like that, and your vote won't get lost that way. So there's definitely still write-in candidates. I don't know how it's been affected by the fact that there is this kind of quote-unquote shortlist now, but it's over 1,000, 1,500 songs.
And that's picked by the station. Do they decide that 1,000?
Yeah, so they put
their playlist for the year, or
exactly. They kind of put all the songs that they've been playing. But write-in candidates do get in. The kind of before the change of the date, the biggest controversy in the Hottest 100 was when BuzzFeed tried to get Taylor Swift into the Hottest 100, and that one was an interesting one because Triple J actually said, "Look, we're not going to let this song in because there was this kind of aggressive push to effectively to change the integrity of the countdown. They want to know what people actually like and what they think about, rather than feeling this kind of pressure from an online conglomerate to change things." But whatever you feel about that and its effect on the democracy is fair. But the campaign was successful. If Triple J had let Taylor Swift make the Hottest 100, I think Shake It Off would have come 14th that year. So it was a very successful campaign, but they did say no, and they did say that is not what the Hottest 100 is about. Not Taylor Swift specifically, but the idea that you would try to hack the countdown, I think, is what they disagreed.
What's the safeguard to say that it doesn't? Because I mean, the way that operates reminds me of the Logie Awards, which is another one where you vote for your favourite TV show. And I know in the old days when I was a youngster, it was writing, and company, stations would just get people to, write in 1,000, whatever, and flood the market with supposedly the voters, the choice of the people. But it's a manipulation. So is there any guarantee that, I mean, that's a publicised one with Taylor Swift?
Yeah, I think it's because they did it so publicly, right? Like it was designed as
So
as an infiltration.
One person, one vote. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, if you did it a bit more subtly, I think you could manipulate it if you wanted. But
okay. No,
yeah.
So you don't write out 100.
No, you vote for 10 songs.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, you vote for 10 songs, and then and you don't rank your 10 songs. You vote for 10, and then they're all worth one vote. Yeah.
Oh.
How many people do they get voting each year?
So I believe that the record is around 3.2 million votes. And I think it has come down a little bit to more around 2.93 million. But yeah, there was a couple of years there where it spiked at about 3.2. Yeah, so it's a big cross section. There's a lot of people that are invested in it.
And is it that you have to have heard it on Triple J, or it could be just your favourite song?
Yeah, so it is not that you have to have heard it on Triple J. That was, I believe, a bit of a misnomer for a long time, is that it had to have been played on Triple J. There's kind of a bit more of a kind of similar to the Nickelback thing that I was talking about. There's kind of a spirit of that there are certain artists that would be played on Triple J, and they kind of fit within the alternative sound of the countdown. But theoretically, if you could definitely vote for Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah.
But I think what they didn't count on was this kind of full public campaign to do it. But yeah, you can vote for whoever you want as long as the song came out that year. That's how a band like the Wiggles wins the Hottest 100.
That was my favourite song of that year.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There you go. You rarely find many people now who cop to having voted for the Wiggles.
I didn't vote for it, but
Yeah.
I liked it.
I just think, 2021, we're all still very much in
It was because it was a COVID year.
very much still in the throes of lockdown. The Wiggles were just a nice little comfort blanket that we all needed to wrap ourselves in, and we're all in a big collective fever dream. And the Wiggles rocking out with an elephant on their head was exactly what we needed at the time, apparently.
Do you find that people do age out of the Hottest 100? Because
Yeah, I don't know if people. I think yes. And look, I even found this most recent one was the first year. Like the book was done, the book was out. I listened to it without having to like think about how it's going to edit the book again. Because that's the thing with a book about the Hottest 100, they just keep having them. So I was just listening, and it did feel like the first year, even where I had to admit, I was like, I don't know all of these artists the way that I used to know
yeah,
them.
because I remember listening to it in my early 20s, and I was like, oh yeah, I know like almost every song, and listened to it the last even last 5 years, I knew like 3 or 4 at most. So I'm obviously just not listening to the music that is being very
And I think what tends to happen with like Hottest 100 diehards who kind of stay relatively tapped in is that you actually get to the point where the Hottest 100 is now giving you new music rather than you being invested in shaping it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool too. You know, like what's been really fun about doing these talks is we've had a bunch of times we've had like families come, you know, where the mum and dad started listening to the Hottest 100 in the 90s and voted in those early countdowns, and now their kids are 15 and listening to all this stuff. And the fact that they still have music as a conduit, even if, you know, you never like the stuff that your parents liked as much as you'd like to. So that's been really fun, is to like see that kind of generational gap, like just existing in real life. Like, you know, just seeing like a dad and a son talk about like what real music is, and it's great. It's been really fun.
So 2 questions.
Yeah.
One about the title. I had to look up Ouroboros to see what it meant. And the other is, has anybody copied the top 100, Hottest 100 in other parts of the world?
So,
First.
the title is probably a bit wankier than it needed to be, but it sounded fun at the time. It was the idea of, so an Ouroboros, for people who don't know, is a snake eating its own tail. And the idea was, you know, that kind of concept that I talked about of like who is feeding who the music and ideals that create the Hottest 100. You know, is it that people are listening to certain music and caring about certain music, and that gets reflected on the radio and then voted into the countdown, or is it that the radio gives us this music and then we put it in certain orders, and then that continues to feed what's shown to us? And I think that feedback loop is becoming even more intense now that we've got algorithms that feed music to us online. You know, you get, rather than having a radio station that might throw something different at you every now and again, you know, you might be listening to a Spotify playlist that's supposed to be pulling in different stuff, but is in fact just kicking back the same stuff that you've been listening to, and you have to go out and find it. And so that was the kind of the concept. It was a bit more like a sort of a cultural feedback loop. And as far as whether it's been copied, not successfully. So it really doesn't exist anywhere else. And if you know, I used to work in a hostel overseas, and we would have these big Hottest 100 nights, and people who weren't Australian were just like mind blown by the concept that like it was so big and important that people cared about it as much as they did. But they really dug it. But it was a real kind of cultural mind blow of like, well, what is this? And you know, because we would get like people. I was in Budapest, and we would get people traveling from like Poland and the Czech Republic to come to these Hottest 100 parties, because it was like a real moment to just like spend the night with Australians listening to this music that mattered so much. So those were really cool. But no, so it's been kind of replicated poorly elsewhere, but mostly it is. I think it's pretty unique.
Well, the ABC does, the ABC FM, the classical, have top 100s for various genres of classical music. So I don't know whether they've taken that from Triple J.
I mean, I think that it kind of now, the Hottest 100 has been, entrenched for so long that it kind of feels like, patient zero as far as those sort of things go. I think certainly some of those ABC ones are, trying to adultify the hottest 100.
That idea.
I know at one point Triple M in Sydney did a Aussie rock hottest 100 on Australia Day to try to mock Triple J. I think
I've got to see about this. I have to see one this morning.
Yeah.
Filthy 50. 50 best songs about sex. That's on Double J.
Oh yeah, Double J is doing that right now. Yeah.
Yes, on that.
Goodness.
Next 5 days.
Yeah. They did the first 10 today. I did see that. Physical by Olivia Newton-John. That was the one that I heard.
I mean, Apple Music's just done the greatest albums of all time
Yeah.
as well, which is an interesting one.
Yeah. And the all-time ones, that happens a lot, right? Apple Music did their albums. Rolling Stone have done their, 500 greatest albums of all time, that sort of stuff. But I think the concept of a voter-driven countdown of the year's music, it remains pretty unique to the Hottest 100. And it's certainly one that continues to endure every year. Definitely, I think, is unique. Yeah.
How long does it run for? When does it start for the voting?
So the voting goes for about a month,
Yeah.
and then they start it at midday on the Saturday, and it goes until about 8 o'clock at night. The actual countdown itself. Yeah.
So it's early January, or where is it moved to?
It's moved to the last Saturday of January. Yeah. That's right.
Unless it's 26, I know it can't be the last Saturday.
Yeah, if it is the 20, it happened. What did they do?
It can be, because it could be the 5th.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah. I think it happened where the 26th was the Saturday, and they didn't play it on the 26th. I can't remember when they played it though. It must have been the Sunday. They must have done it on the Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, but they did have to,
Yeah, you can get the 26th being the 4th Saturday.
Yeah. and it was semi-recently, the last couple of years.
There are no more questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom.
No worries, thank you.
Small from the library. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
For a very interesting talk. I think we've all enjoyed it very much, haven't we? Thank you so much. There's tea and coffee at the back, and there's some books from our collection based on music, if you'd like to have a look, all available for loans. Thank you for coming.
Also, in answer to your question about the 26th, my wife must be watching on YouTube because she just texted me and said they played it the weekend before.
And you want to buy a copy of the book?
Books to sell.
Yeah. I'll just look at the States back in the 70s. And they used to do a